Diplomacy, a game renowned for its politics and intrigue, but also its particular lack of military strategy. So, what if you made it into a game where battles are actually fought? Well, that's exactly what my friend and fellow YouTuber Mr. V thought, gathering 7 players, me included, to fight against each other for European domination. But before the game could begin, we'd have to get our nations. I wonder what I got. Hopefully the Ottomans or Spain's, something easy. You gotta be fucking kidding me. I had gotten Sweden, one of, if not the hardest nation in the game, surrounded on all sides by powerful neighbors and with very difficult expansion routes, but maybe with a bit of clever diplomacy I could wiggle my way out of the peninsula. And so I planned my opening moves. It was immediately clear who I would have to fight first: Russia. Since I could move my army in Norway into Carellia with support from Finland, Russia wouldn't be able to contest the neutral territory with only one army in St. Petersburg, and once Carellia was secured, I could then strike into the city itself with 2 of my armies, and potentially cripple Russia before the game had even truly begun. But for this plan to work, I needed to first secure my flanks and gather allies. And so I formed a group chat with the British player Thomas and the Ottoman player Evicted. Evicted and I quickly agreed to fight Russia together, while Thomas signed a non-aggression pact with me. With that, I only needed 1 more nation secured, and so I reached out to the Prussian player, Judge. At first things seemed rather promising. Judge even appeared open to the idea of joining us against Russia. But the second I asked for a non-aggression pact, everything changed. He suddenly accused me and France of plotting against him, even though the French player, Chris, had already told me he was planning to attack Britain instead, and had absolutely no interest in fighting Prussia. Then, somehow the negotiations got even worse. Judge demanded I tell France to pay him 20,000 gold as compensation before he would even consider peace. An absurd amount that made it painfully obvious he was just looking for an excuse to justify invading me. And then came the real disaster. Prussia signed a treaty with Russia. Not only were they now allied, but they had agreed to never sign a separate peace, meaning if I fought one of them, I'd be fighting until the bitter end. Suddenly my position looked hopeless. The Ottomans were too far away to help me directly, and Britain refused to get involved because he had already signed a pact with Russia and was busy preparing for war with France. Which meant now I was stuck between 2 major powers coordinating against me. Still, I tried one final time to reason with Judge in DMs. He claimed he would reveal all his planned troop movements in advance so I could prepare myself better, insisting that his actions would prove he wasn't lying. But from my perspective, this changed absolutely nothing. Without an actual pact, there were no guarantees whatsoever. And when I asked him directly why he refused to sign one so badly, his answers only made me more suspicious. He openly admitted that Denmark would eventually be under him, even though he knew I was planning to take it, and publicly revealed his military order to move into the Baltic. Even while insisting he doesn't lie, he was simultaneously telling me he intended to focus his entire army against Sweden. At that point, diplomacy was dead. The conversation devolved into threats as both of us prepared for war. It was now spring 1800. The Prussian and Swedish fleet were given orders to move into the Baltic, while the Russian army in St. Petersburg launched an attack on Finland. First, I fought Judge. The only issue was, the game we were using to simulate the battles, Lob, while I was really good at the game, I hadn't played in a while, and had gotten quite rusty, and my army composition was extremely outdated and no longer meta. But I had a simple plan. I would hold the center and right flank, and focus all of my strongest troops on the left. Unfortunately for me, I was way too slow, and Judge had plenty of time to move his reserves to the area, forcing me to continue and try to outflank him. But this maneuver cost me way too much time, and my right flank was broken, while the center was soon to follow. In a desperate bid to snatch victory, I launched a disorganized assault on the left. Judge then launched his own attack with his cavalry, routing my cuirassiers and threatening to outflank me. I had no choice but to withdraw. Meanwhile, in the Battle of Finland, I quickly gained the upper hand at the start, managing to push the right flank with my guards while withdrawing from the left. The plan was working perfectly, and all I had to do was continue to retreat on the left, and victory would be mine. But foolishly, I turned around, thinking I could take on the Russians, and I was quickly overwhelmed. Then, the skillful use of cavalry by the Russian player Reeve resulted in all of my cavalry being lost, as well as several infantry brigades and artillery pieces. The tide had turned against me, and it was clear victory was impossible. I once again withdrew. In only one turn, I had suffered 2 major defeats and lost one of my core territories. Then came the fall of 1800, where in a brutal and grinding battle, I was yet again defeated, and Judge occupied my capital city of Sweden. In the east, my attempts to reclaim Finland had failed, and again I was defeated by the Russian player, Reeve. The situation seemed unwinnable. The Russians launched an attack on Carellia, and if they won, I would lose another important supply center, leaving me with just Norway, which would force me to disband 2 of my armies and effectively doom me. The battle would be my all or nothing. If I win, I live to fight another day. If I don't, I lose the game in only 1 year. The battle had begun quite well. Luck was on my side and we fought on hills, which my composition was rather strong in. But that wouldn't be enough to win me the battle. Reeve was an aggressive player. Especially in this kind of map, he would try to launch an attack. So I laid my trap, placing my elite grenadiers as reserves and my light infantry as bait, and waited for him to strike. Then it came. Reeve sent 2 battalions of grenadiers on the left of the forest, where my secret weapon had been revealed. Howitzers. Normally a very weak unit, but extremely effective in forest terrain. And I was able to fire an arc, which meant I could fire over my troops and over the hills. The howitzer barrage obliterated his units, and I sent some of my own grenadiers to finish them off. Then, it turned out it was a distraction. The real attack came from the right, and if he broke through, I would lose the battle. I quickly sent my reserves, while having my militia and skirmisher units hold their ground for as long as they could. The fighting was desperate, but my militia and skirmishers had held for long enough. But Reeve wasn't done just yet. Once again using his superior cavalry, he sent them forward, attempting to flank me. Unfortunately for him, I'd already predicted this move, placing a massive battery to obliterate his cavalry as they approached with canister shot. Meanwhile in the forest, it was my time to launch a counterattack. I sent forward my grenadiers, routing the Russians. On the right, my cavalry managed to defeat the Russian counterparts, and outflank the Russians, together with my elite guards. Reeve had no choice but to withdraw, and the battle was won. Not only had I defended Carellia, but I also captured the Russian capital of St. Petersburg in the battle, meaning I would be able to maintain my 3 armies in the upcoming winter. Meanwhile, the French launched a daring attack on London, capturing the city, but were quickly checked by the Prussians, who launched an attack and defeated them in the Rhine. It was clear what my next move should be. I contacted the French player Chris, and we agreed to work together against the Prussians. We also did set meeting in the Berlin voice chat. Now, these voice chats were limited to 2 people, so Judge could only watch in anger as we spoke to our heart's content in his capital. Trolling aside, my situation was still dire. The Prussians had acquired a total of 6 supply centers, meaning they could build 3 new armies. Then, my greatest fear came true. Judge was so dedicated to eliminating me, he had built 2 additional fleets, meaning my 3 armies would have to face 5 Prussian and Russian ones. If I could not score some victories in the spring, my army would definitely be overwhelmed. Spring 1801 would see me fighting 3 battles. 1 to reclaim Sweden, 1 to reclaim Finland, and 1 to take Moscow. Luckily for me, I had designed a new composition for my armies, which was much better and had more cavalry. Despite the improvement of my composition, I still had not gained enough experience using it, and Reeve revealed his trump card. He had hired a mercenary to command his army, Rox, one of the best players in lines of battle. Needless to say, I was defeated easily. And Carellia fell to the Russians. This also meant that my army at St. Petersburg was encircled, and if it was defeated, it would be destroyed. Getting confident, Reeve decided he would command his own army. And I decided I have to change my tactics. I decided the best way to defeat Reeve was to make him overextend, then launch a concentrated attack. Reeve always forms his army up in a very wide formation, so I would avoid engaging on the left and send my grenadiers north to smash through with my new, much heavier artillery. Unfortunately for me, Reeve quickly realized my plan, attempting to withdraw his army from the right. I launched my cavalry in pursuit, but I only managed to catch and rout 2 infantry brigades and a couple skirmishers. Meanwhile, Reeve had managed to march forward at a surprisingly fast pace, reaching my defensive line in the south, while I had made barely any progress in the north. Reeve also sent his cavalry to try and outflank me, which would effectively doom my southern flank, and I lacked my own cavalry to stop him. The situation was dire, and I had to take action. In a bold move, I ordered my line infantry to charge forward, while bringing troops from the north to fill their place. I managed to force his cavalry back, even routing 2 of his dragoons, while my northern reserves had arrived to reinforce me. I now realized I greatly outnumbered him in the south, and my heavy artillery had managed to deal a lot of damage to his troops. As he attempted to fall back, I ordered my army to launch a full-scale assault. But now, my north was weak, and Reeve launches his own attack, hoping to break through my flank and attack me in the south. But thanks to the combination of grenadiers, heavy artillery, and cavalry, he was unable to break through my defenses, and was forced to withdraw. I had now captured Moscow, and as a revenge for the fall of Stockholm, I burnt the city to the ground. This left only one battle to be fought, the battle to reclaim Sweden. But Judge, afraid of fighting me with my newfound vigor, had once again hired the same mercenary which had defeated me in Carellia, Rox, to fight and win his battle. If I was going to win, I would have to create a desperate plan, one which would nullify Rox's skills to micro. And so when I had to pick my choice for the map, I chose Hedgerows, a map which most of the LoB community rather hates due to its low visibility and making the use of artillery and cavalry extremely difficult. But that's exactly what made it perfect for my plan. You see, in lines of battle, there are several neutral stars across the map, which can be captured in order to receive more ammo for your artillery, as well as some victory points. Players always capture these because they give you an advantage, however small it is, in the upcoming combat. The problem is when you capture a star, your enemy will know, and could thus estimate the location and movement speed of your army. But what if I didn't capture the star? That was my plan. By capturing the stars on the right, where I had only left a tiny force, and having the rest of my army deploy on the left, deliberately avoiding capturing the stars, I would be able to fool Rox into thinking my main attack was coming from the right. The battle progressed as my troops marched forward, and I had finally spotted Rox's army, and it was split. But there was enough distance for him to retreat. But still believing he was facing only half my army, he stood his ground. Now was my chance. My grenadiers, which until now hid behind the tree line, sprung forward, while my cavalry launched a massive charge. Rox quickly panicked, ordering his grenadiers from the right to return and assist him. But my attack was so fast that by the time he brought them, the entire army was killed or captured. His reinforcements followed suit, being slaughtered mercilessly, while several units of cavalry I had hidden and marched across the other side of the map arrived to flank him, dooming what remains of his artillery. The Russians suffered so many casualties that the game ended before he could even withdraw. The victory was massive. The Prussians suffered 23,000 casualties to my 7,500. Sweden was retaken, and while the war was far from won, it was clear I now had a chance. Then, I received some good news. The Russians were defeated twice by the Ottomans, and France had made peace with Britain, meaning he could now focus his full attention on Prussia. Another turn passed, and it was now the fall of 1801, and the Prussians launched a massive counterattack. 2 fleets attacked St. Petersburg, ensuring the fall of the city, while another Prussian fleet attacked Sweden, and a Russian army attacked Norway. I had managed to score yet another massive victory, defeating the Russians in the same way I defeated Rox and recapturing the province. Finally, victory was at my grasp. All I had to do was win one singular battle, and victory would be assured. Once more the battle started off well. My artillery took up position on the hill, blasting away at the horribly exposed Prussians, while I concentrated my forces on the left. Meanwhile, Judge had focused his attack on the right, where he slowly and surely pushed me back and grinded me down. But I had already completed my redeployment, and my troops surged forward once more and destroyed most of Judge's left flank. I was in the lead, I had dealt a massive amount of casualties, and I was about to win. But then, I look at the power bar. Judge was in the lead. But how? I have dealt so much more casualties. Then I realized. Judge had captured most of the stars, and had now started running away to avoid me being able to regain the lead. And with only a couple turns left in the match, I didn't have the time to capture enough stars or chase him. He had won in the scummiest way possible, and victory had slipped from my grasp again. Following the defeat, I was informed that the Austrians, who were supposed to launch an attack on Kiev, had not only been defeated, but made peace, meaning the Russians would be back on the attack. In the spring, I launched an attack on Finland, finally managing to destroy the encircled Russians there. But in Moscow, I was the one who was encircled, and if I were defeated, the Russians would reclaim their supply center and destroy an entire army, leaving me defenseless. So I decided to gamble it all in an insane maneuver. While in hedgerows the map prevents your enemy from seeing your army, in hills that is only partially the case, meaning my advance would be quickly spotted. Still, if I could advance fast enough, I may be able to break his army. So I concentrated it, and the battle begun. I rushed south while having a small force act as a distraction. This proved to be extremely successful, with most of the Russian force heading north after my bait instead of the actual army rushing south. By the time he realized it was a trap, it was too late, and my army surged forward, destroying most of his artillery. But the situation had become dangerous. His army began to turn to face my own, while his troops captured my main supply point. I had to finish this quickly. Ordering my troops to run, I found myself facing the Russians, who decided to hold along the forest. Slowly and surely they grinded down the Russians, who, in a last-ditch attempt to save their forces, launched a desperate cavalry charge. But I was prepared. My cavalry counterattacked, pinning down the enemy. Seeing no hope, and with their entire army being grinded down, the Russians withdrew. However, just as the battle was concluded, and right before I was about to fight the Prussians, I found out the game had updated, with huge changes. Melee had been reduced 2 times, and my army, which had been made up of a lot of grenadiers, a unit mostly used for its melee capabilities, was now much weaker. But it was too late. The battle was on, and despite my best attempt, the Prussians simply grinded me down slowly and surely. Sweden would remain in Prussian hands for another turn, but it seemed the tides of the war were finally turning. The French defeated the Prussians, capturing Saxony, and a French fleet had arrived to help me reclaim Sweden, guaranteeing the recapture of the province next turn, while the Ottomans had agreed to attack the Russians in Kiev with my support. This only left St. Petersburg. I led my units into the province, where I once again would meet rocks in battle. I once again changed my composition, this time making use of a combination of light infantry, guards, and heavy cannons, relying on shock and awe to win the day. After a small cavalry skirmish, the battle was on. Rox had a huge amount of heavy artillery, intending to pin me down with his fire, while sending most of his army to break my left. Quickly spotting this, I moved my reserves to halt his advance. Just before the line could collapse, the guard had arrived, holding off the entire enemy left flank, while my artillery scattered his cavalry. Still, I was on the defensive. I had to do something. And against the judgment of every good lines of battle player, I decided to push through the thick of the artillery fire on the right and break through his flank. Despite huge losses, my men pressed forward, taking out the Prussian batteries. On the left, my guard held strong, while the artillery obliterated the charge of the Prussian guard. In the north, my light infantry routed the Prussians, causing a massive rout with much of the enemy army fleeing. It was time to finish my masterpiece. My right wrapped around the remaining Prussians, obliterating what's left of their army. Yet again, I had won another brilliant and absolute victory, securing St. Petersburg, Sweden, and Kiev, meaning Russia was now gone, and Prussia was left alone, isolated, weakened, and encircled. There was no question. Prussia would fall. It was only a matter of time. Then, finally, I will win. What the f? The British, hungry for conquest, and seeing my horribly exposed back, had broken our treaty, launching a full-scale invasion and seizing Carellia in Norway without a fight. Yet again, I was in a desperate situation. Yet again, my homeland was threatened. However, my victory in St. Petersburg had meant that my army could now refocus its attention, attacking and forcing the British to retreat from Carellia, while another army launched an attack on Norway. And despite nearly breaking, the Swedish guards saved the day, restoring the line and pushing back the enemy. I then ordered a massive charge at the Carelians. The British were so terrified, their entire army fled the field, while my cavalry was launched in pursuit, inflicting horrible casualties, forcing them out of Scandinavia for good. Sweden followed suit, with the Prussians abandoning it after realizing they could not defend it. With Scandinavia back in Swedish hands, I focused my efforts on finishing off the fleeing British units. Eventually, I caught up with them in Moscow and Königsberg, only to suffer 2 crippling defeats due to Thomas's brave last stand. Despite these setbacks, I was determined to finish off the British. With support from both my fleet and the French army, I managed to take the province, discovering that Austrian troops had been helping the British all along. This only meant one thing: Austria was coming. Once again, I was under threat by a nation far stronger than I. The British, however, were not done just yet. They attempted to strike at Norway, but were defeated and forced to turn back. Their empire was crumbling. My fleet had captured Iceland, the French had landed in great numbers on the Isles, and after a grueling 2-year-long campaign, managed to secure Britain. Meanwhile, my suspicions of an Austrian invasion were confirmed when they launched an attack on Königsberg. Seeing the potential of using the river as a strong defensive point, I used my incredibly fast army to quickly capture positions along its bank. But Vanir, the Austrian player, had much more and much heavier artillery than I did. This meant that if I just stood still, I would be blasted into oblivion. Luckily for me, due to my quick capture of the riverbank, I was able to capture many stars, meaning I had much more ammo than he did. And so I sought to buy time for his cannons to run out of ammo. I advanced on the right, threatening to outflank him, while ordering a cavalry charge on the left. Both sides suffered roughly equal casualties, but my dragoons were forced to withdraw behind the river due to the arrival of the enemy infantry. Seeing how concentrated his force was, I brought up nearly all of my cannons and began blasting away, forcing him to retreat. Meanwhile in the center, the bombardment had taken its toll on my troops, and Vanir ordered his grenadiers to break through a critical bridge, which if I lost, would effectively cut my army in half. However, despite the devastating charge, reinforcements held their advance long enough, and the battle on the bridge bogged down until even more reinforcements arrived to relieve them. In the right, my cavalry had managed to cross the river, but got charged by enemy dragoons. But it was too late. I brought the guard with light infantry and forced the dragoons to flee. To the north, the force which I had sent on the wide outflanking maneuver managed to rout 2 battalions of infantry and prevented the escape of the Austrian forces. Finally, the cherry on top came when I had noticed enemy cannons had run out of ammo, and quickly ordered my light infantry forward. They charged, routing the entire enemy battery and taking 40 heavy guns. Encircled, demoralized, and utterly defeated, Vanir was forced to withdraw. Unfortunately, the campaign had taken its toll on the players, and after several turns of indecisive battles where neither side really managed to defeat the other, it was clear the front would be stuck for a long time. And seeing as none of us wanted to play from our graves, we agreed on a 4-way draw. Thus concluded the campaign, and to be honest, I was rather satisfied. I had received by far the hardest nation, fought the most battles, survived the worst odds. In my book, even if I could not conquer the world, hell, even if I was the weakest nation by the end of the campaign, this was an absolute victory. If you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate if you'd like, subscribe, and comment. My videos take a very long time to make, and all I have to make them with is a dusty laptop far past its prime. I also opened a YouTube membership if any of you would like to support me even more, but to be honest, you watching this is already doing me a huge honor. Until next time, thank you for watching. Psst! Hey! Are you wondering how the Ottomans went from the strongest faction to being destroyed in only a couple turns? Or maybe you want to hear about the rise of France and its wars with all its neighbors. Well, I'm told that Mr. V is planning to make a video on it very soon, which I'll link here when it's released. But until then, go check out and subscribe to his channel to keep notified when he releases it.